Hi everybody and welcome to this week's Under the Hat with Gavin and myself and Graeme McDowall. Graeme is a lecturer of golf and sport at Scotland's Rural College and also the Open University, as along with being a PGA professional and very well versed and very well respected in the world of constraints-led coaching within the world of golf. So Graeme, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you giving up your time.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Oh, brilliant. So as normal, we'll keep this really light-hearted and have a good chat. And anybody that's listening, feel free to, and watching, feel free to jump in and ask any questions at any time. We want you guys to be as interactive as you can and get everything out of the session that you want to have, and not exactly what Gavin and I want to have as an agenda. But Graeme, you've well renowned, as I said, in the world of constraints-led approaches to golf coaching. I know working with the students that you do, you talk a lot about that. But before we get into that, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your background and how you developed your interest and your expertise in this particular area. So the journey that got you there, it'd be fantastic to hear a little bit about how that happened.
Yeah, sure thing, Stuart. I came through the traditional PGA training route, so it kind of got into golf, fairly late on, around about 13, 14 years old, and yeah, quickly developed an interest in golf, and really kind of threw myself into the playing aspect of things. Eventually started as a trainee when I was maybe 17, 18 years old. And yeah, just kind of went through that traditional PGA training route, wanted to play, had no interest in coaching. I think like most people of my era, I think maybe different to nowadays where people come into the profession to coach. Most people I knew in my era came in to play, and I tried to do that. Very much followed what we would call the champions model of the day, which is to identify who's the best golfer in the world at this moment and try and copy what they were doing. And that's been a kind of well-trodden path for many people. And of course, the champion of the time when I was getting into golf was Nick Faldo. So, and particularly around about, what was about 87, where he's obviously starting to work with David Leadbetter, and so I was super tuned into what was going on there with that, and alongside my kind of colleagues and friends, and we were all trying to swing it like Faldo, and we all had towels under our arms, and using training aids and beach balls between our legs, and hitting thousands of balls and all of that. So I kind of followed that route in terms of the playing side, and interestingly enough, I kind of from a playing perspective, I became a pretty decent ball striker, but wasn't really very good at turning that into low scores. So I'd hit, go down the route of hitting thousands of balls, try to swing it really technically perfect, because you had this kind of perception that that's what Faldo was chasing. Whether or not he was or he wasn't, you guys would know better. But that certainly seemed to be the message that we were taking on board. So, and the reason I'm developing that conversation is because that became sort of a conundrum down the line, and kind of led me into the study aspect of things, the skill acquisition field, to try and understand better how, I became this really good ball striker, but, couldn't translate that into good scores, and would turn up at tournaments with guys who were, that swings that looked like they were kind of all over the place, and they were posting these kind of really good scores every week. And that became a point of interest and led me down the path of trying to understand more about practice and skill acquisition, and the transfer of practice to performance, and what was going on there. Why was I hitting the ball so well in practice and yet performing so badly, and fascinating. That kind of thing, it's like you practice and you're hitting the ball great, and then you turn up on the golf course, and that game was like a stranger to you. You couldn't access that game, and I always remember I'd try and play tournaments with this kind of necky fade, because it's the only way I could get the ball around the golf course in under 80, and yet on the practice ground you're hitting it like Ben Hogan, and then you go out in the golf course and you're playing with this wee sort of cutty thing to just get the ball around the golf course. So yeah, that's kind of a wee bit of a kind of story of my developmental history of trying to play golf.
Yeah, no, fascinating. And I think, I grew up in the same era as yourself, and I think that's how it was perceived. Obviously, for Gavin and I, we're fortunate to spend quite a bit of time around David and learn a little bit more of exactly how it was with Nick, and everything was perceived to be very technical from the outside world in. And yes, he did do a lot of drills. He was trying to, establish certain movements that, yeah, I think it all goes back to what David wrote in the golf swing book, that Nick was tired of searching for, like you said, feels that were different all the time. He wanted to have something robust that would stand up under pressure. Obviously already a major winner, already a competitor, but David says, Nick was fantastic with feel and imagination and creativity, and it's maybe just a side that we didn't see from what was documented in the press and media at the time. But definitely I look back at kind of my journey as a junior golfer, and some of the coaching that I had in the early days, and there was definitely an awareness that it was more form over function, and it had to look a specific way. You had to look a certain way to dress. The move away should have followed a certain path and an angle. And I think, the stuff that you've researched, and we'll get into this, but there's definitely, I see, and definitely for Gavin and I, the way that we help train and certify all of our coaches is that it's got to be function over form, and what works for the individual, and does the individual have ownership of what they have, and are we creating the right environment? And I guess that leads to a question for me in terms of the research that you've been doing and where you've got to. A lot of the constraints-based theory, or led coaching, is a lot about the environment that you create or you potentially set up, how you manipulate it at the right time for the right individual, which is a skill in itself for the coach to know what to do and when, and how to manipulate it to point them in the right direction. Could you bring that to life a little bit more for you in terms of how you work with players, or how you work with other coaches as well around this?
Yeah, no, definitely true. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned form and function. And that would be one of the kind of underlying principles, or at least ways of thinking about skill development. So one of the things that kind of comes clear through the research is that typically form follows function. So, and I could relate that back to the guys who were playing really well when I was younger, that their swings, although they didn't look technically perfect, they were just an expression of the way they had solved the problem of hitting the golf ball. So the functionality was the effectiveness with which they could hit the ball. The form was the thing we could see. So that was their swing. And my conceptualization of how to get better at golf was the other way about. So I thought that I had to develop form first in order to function better. And that's what was taken from the kind of magazine articles and the videos and the way that the champions of the day were getting perceived. And again, bringing that back to Faldo, obviously more ignorance, or at least the golfing public's ignorance of the situation. So it really sits on that kind of aspect of things. Now, if you then take that into the constraints-led approach, what we would say there is that it's the task that builds the action. Okay, so we're more about giving instruction about the task than we are giving instruction about the solution. So if we can come up with a properly designed task, it's then up to the individual to come up with the movement solution in order to fulfill the aspects of that task. And that's why, a constraints-led approach is just one part of what's called a nonlinear pedagogy. Okay, so nonlinear pedagogy is the kind of umbrella term. The manipulation of constraints is just one aspect of that. And the nonlinear aspect is that you know, you could give 10 people the same task and they could come up with 10 different functional ways of satisfying the task.
Yeah.
And all those movements might look different, but they're all functional. And the reason they're functional is because I guess we're all swinging in our own story, and our own story is unique, and that could just be injury history, that could be height, length of limbs, perception of the task. All of these kind of things can make the forum look different, but yet it produces the same outcome. And I was kind of aware of, I could see that all around me as a golfer growing up. I could see all these different forums that were functional and couldn't really understand it. Made intuitive sense for me to try and think about the golf swing more mechanically, and something that is more robotic, and therefore if you can repeat this thing, then it's going to stand up under pressure. So yeah, so bringing it back to the constraints aspect of things, it really becomes about the task, okay, and trying to design what we'd call contextually relevant tasks, because if the task doesn't match something that you're going to encounter on the golf course, then it's probably not going to transfer very well. And you have this kind of mismatch between what you're practicing and what you're experiencing on the golf course. So one of the key underlying principles of a constraints approach is what we call representative learning design. And it's just really the specificity principle that your training should match as closely the demands of the real thing if you want it to transfer. Okay, but at the same time, that does exist along a continuum. That if you're a complete beginner, then the task is to strike the golf ball, yeah, and then strike the ball better, and then be able to transfer that into a context where you can deal with you know, the psychological aspects of the game and all of these. That's a long-winded answer, Stuart. I've no idea if that even answered the question, but the task builds the action so that the action can be built in an individual manner.
Yeah, no, I think it answers the question brilliantly, Graeme. I think it gives a little bit of the science behind it as well, you know, what you've explained. And I guess for me, from a coaching point of view, obviously you're working with players of all different standards, and when you're giving them tasks, you're obviously trying to push them a little bit out of their comfort zone, that they keep improving in the areas that the task's designed to help them with. How much harder do you make it than where they, if you benchmark them now, where they are right now in their standard, how much of a push to the next level do you organize or create the task for them? Because obviously if you make it so difficult, you'll have certain individuals will figure things out, but others will just perceive it as failure, and they'll see no success, which is obviously not great for self-belief, self-esteem, confidence, etc. I'm just interested, and I guess this is the art of what you do, and any coach, is to know where to pitch it to move the player to the next level. Because I still see in coaching, not in general, but in certain pockets, where coaches are not very good at really being aware of where the players they're working with are in terms of their game. So not just keeping stats and whatnot, but knowing really what areas are we really going to see a return on investment and lower the scoring. Because there's still that world of, let's go at the range, let's watch you hit some balls, let's kind of look at your swing, when the reality is that might be the last thing that player ever really needs. But be interested to get your thoughts a little bit about where you pitch the tasks relative to where the player wants to go long term, but where you need to get them as the next step.
No, it's a great question, Stuart. I think you said it as well. You know, that's the kind of art of any coaching, isn't it? Really try to work that out in terms of you know, where you pitch things, and I guess it's part of the professional judgment, decision-making aspect of coaching. And I think it does operate again along that continuum of where the player is. You know, how are you working with somebody who's trying to get on tour? Where are they? Have you benchmark, you know, some of the stuff that you can quantify, and they're quite close. You know, I always think Colin Montgomery's advice to young Scottish guys years ago was change nothing when you get on a tour, you know, and don't change what you've got, but maybe change what you do with what you've got. And that's really a message about trying to make the most out of your abilities. And that could be thinking about the game different tactically, and we use constraints to do that. Excuse me, in the high performance groups, we'll design on-course tasks that force the player to make decisions about how they can get the most out of what they've got in the day. Okay, so it's adapting what you've got to the challenge and learning that skill, so that you can take that and put it into a performance context. I think that's a key thing. But if you're working with a beginner who's clearly, you know, got some fundamental issues with just striking a ball, then the challenge is a little bit different. And it's you know, it could be something as simple as something we would all do at various stages in our coaching, is maybe put down an obstacle on the ground. You might, you know, somebody who's got a really dysfunctional swing path, it could be as simple as putting a head cover in the way to try and constrain them away from that dysfunctional movement. And again, within what you feel would be something that they would be capable of doing. So if I was to, you know, place a head cover on the inside of the ball to try and get the path more from the outside, I'm not telling them how to shift that path. The head cover doesn't tell them how to shift the path, but it makes them shift the path. You know, so they have to explore their own movement capabilities there to come up with that solution. So, you know, it works along a massive continuum, and again, it's the role of the coach to try and find, you know, the right piece of information. A constraint's just a piece of information that changes behavior. And it can be changing movement behavior, it can be changing tactical behavior, it can be changing psychological behavior. You know, all of these kind of things we use. For example, you know, we'll deliberately put players on the clock when they're training at the higher level to try and upset them, to see how they react psychologically. We'll use enforced delays when they're training. So we've got a hooter, stick that off just to see how behavior changes when all of a sudden the flow is disrupted. And we get all sorts of reactions from that, and we can understand more about their, like I say, their psychological characteristics. But really, it's about putting obstacles in their way so that they come up with strategies to deal with that in such a way that, again, is representative of something they might experience in the context they're trying to play in. So, yeah, it's no one answer, but you're right. The key is to just, you know, place that challenge far enough away from them that it's attainable, but it requires a bit of struggle, but that struggle creates a lasting change.
Sorry, Graeme, just one point on that. I think Gavin has a couple of questions as well there. Is, I think what you talked about with designing the tasks there, and you said about challenging the players so you see how they react in multiple different ways, psychologically, emotionally, mechanically, with the technique, etc., etc. I think that is huge from a coach's point of view, because generally for most teachers or coaches, they don't always get the opportunity to see the players play under the heat of battle in competition, which in my opinion, that's where probably, if you term it coaching is flawed in the golf world a little bit, because the model is a lot of guys are at a range, they're teaching 8-9 hours a day, lesson after lesson after lesson. For them to go watch one player for a round of golf, it's basically a day out of their revenue, which most parents are not going to be able to afford to do that. So there's constraints for a coach there to not be able to see their player play. But by doing what you're talking about, you actually learn a lot about the player and how they're likely to react in those situations on the golf course, because you're recreating that. And I think that's where there's huge value in the coach really kind of being silent, and like you say, having the task set up, knowing what the kind of the madness is behind it. You know, you've got all this stuff set up and you go, right, well, there's a real purpose in a few different areas here. I'm just going to stand back now and see how it unfolds. And I think that's also something that's really powerful in coaching. I always talk with our coaches about the power of silence sometimes. It's so easy to over communicate. It's so easy to give the answers. It's so easy to tell too much. And especially now with body tracks and TrackMans and Samput labs and Capto systems and simulators that give you everything, it's almost too easy. The player doesn't have to dig it out the dirt for themselves, which when you've got a task, they self-organize and they get things for themselves. So I just wanted to kind of touch, because when you were talking there, that really resonated with me. But
I just come back into that, Stuart, just quickly, because what it made me think of is one of the actual repositioning of the role of the coach. And again, you know, we all operate, if we're coaching commercially, we operate in this kind of, like you say, this system where we're given loads of lessons and whatnot. And remember, you know, I spent probably about 10 years as a teaching professional, and the main aim of the lesson was to get the player hitting the ball better at the end of the half hour than they were hitting it at the beginning of the half hour, and that would be a successful lesson to me. And it wasn't really about, you know, you're going to take this onto the golf course and play better. It just fundamentally, you need to be hitting the ball better after half an hour, so you can go away and I feel like I've earned my money. But actually now, how I kind of reconceptualize that is by the end of the lesson, I really should have been able to find out what you can't do, rather than making this about, you know, what you can do. So if I need to improve your path, I've put down a kind of constraint to help you with that, and you can't yet do it. And I've found this really kind of important point, that you need to go away and figure that out and come back and tell me all about it when you can do it. You know, and it's not this kind of just churning out lessons where as long as your slice is a bit less of a slice after half an hour, that's a tick. Because it didn't really transfer to the course, and people would be coming back all the time going, yeah, I'm not really scoring any better. No, and it kind of, you know, and it's that kind of, so now I look at it more about trying to understand what the player, pushing them to what they can't do, and let them kind of struggle and figure that out. And it's this kind of notion of creating that little bit of chaos, and learning as a journey back from chaos to stability. So once you can stabilize that thing, then we can say, yeah, you've learned something, you know, and I'm going to go and find a little bit more chaos for you. And when you can stabilize that chaos, you've moved forward again. And it's this kind of constant process of just pushing them towards that edge of chaos, so that they can make the journey back to stability, and they're adapting, and there's change, and there's all sorts of good things going on there.
No, fantastic. Gav, I know you're kind of grinning and nodding away there. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I tell you what, Graeme, I've got massive chaos going on in my own head right now. So I've got like 5,000 things to say, and I don't know how to say it. But I'll try and contextualize my thoughts in a number of different ways. And I think, I guess I'm like a lot of coaches, where we've been doing something like this strategy, adopting this strategy for some time without really knowing what we're doing. It just seemed like the right thing to do. And I guess, you know, well done to you for pulling it all together and writing about it and presenting these opportunities for us to learn officially from. But the first thing I wanted to talk about and get your views on really are around how vital it absolutely is for us to allow students, and I'm going to just lower this down in terms of the age group and the ability level. So the foundational years, you know, between 5 and 12, how vital it is that we allow them the opportunity to try and solve the problems by themselves. How does that fit into your thought process?
Yeah, I mean, it's fundamental that I think we allow them to do that, to have that opportunity to find a solution, for sure. And you know, the real danger with trying to impose a solution on a young person is that you take away that opportunity to strive, to try and problem solve, and I guess it kind of conceptualizes quite a lot of what I see, and not really necessarily in golf coaching, but certainly sports that my kids have been involved in and whatnot. They're very much that they're just repeating solutions. You know, they're just repeating solutions. So we've got the answer to the problem and just repeat it, rather than you know, giving them lots of different problems to come up with the solution themselves. So they're learning the skills of adaptability, variability, in order to do things differently. So I think it's hugely important. And again, you know, there's so much of that in the backstories of successful performers, and why we see so, you know, many differing techniques, I think, out there doing really well, particularly now. You know, particularly on tour, we see all these different kind of techniques that if you started with a blank piece of paper and designed an optimal way of moving, I don't think we would come up with all these different, you know, great looking techniques that we now have. So yeah, hugely important, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think I mean, when we're talking about these young children, and that's my world here, you know, we get these kids and it's a blank canvas. They don't know anything. And so in terms of skills acquisition, you've got a multitude of different skills that they have to acquire for each particular discipline. And our job as coaches is to take them, hold their hands, take them on a journey as they learn these different skills. And when I witnessed many junior golf programs or many junior golf coaching sessions around the world, I've often looked at what I've seen and thought, this is just too game focused for the sake of it being a game. There's no real defined outcome with it. I get that it needs to be fun, but I'm now going down the road of, you know, if fun is actually can be quite shallow, because what we think is fun might not be fun for one kid. It might be more fun for another, but actually there's no real substance to that. And when we're talking about engagement, I think that fun is the product of an engaged child, you know, when they're really deeply rooted in a task. So let me just give you a quick example. If I'm going to teach chipping to a group of 7-year-olds who've never played before, I might have 5 stations, and I'll start off with the first station, which won't have anything for them to hit. Right, so it'll just be right. There's where you're going to hit from. You've got to get the ball onto the green. Station 2, I'm going to put 1 noodle on the ground. I'll probably put 2 alignment sticks in the ground as well to keep that sturdy. Station 3, I'll put 1 noodle on top of the other. Station 4, put another noodle on top. So those building blocks kind of grow until they get to the 5th station. So the purpose of that game would be, right, you will score points every time you get the ball on the green. And every time you get the ball on the green, you get to move up. And I would let them play. And I think, I guess this really isn't a question, to be fair, but it's more of an observation, a comment of what we really need to do better. We have to allow children to experience what it is we want them to learn, to get them into that space where they're going to ask questions and then be more receptive to what we tell them. Of course, we then have the ability to be more efficient in what we say because it's direct in terms of it relating to a particular problem. And then, you know, because they've experienced it, then they know then that is one solution. But the whole idea of kids being creative and us allowing them to go through that, I think takes tremendous presence of mind as a coach, because we are and have been for so many years drilled into regurgitating all this information all the time. And like Stu was saying, unfortunately, he stole what I was going to say, you know, the power, the important in this context. And sometimes parents will look at you and think, you know, why is he not saying anything? I'm paying for these golf lessons. He's not said anything for 10 minutes, you know, and actually we're doing the kids the best possible service by creating that environment and that experience for them to learn.
Yeah, no, lots of great points there, for sure. And I think it's, like you say, the parents' perception of coaching is that the coach is in the middle, barking out instruction, or they're kind of giving everybody lots and lots of instruction. So there's a kind of culture change there needed as well from the parents' perspective, that they don't think it's coaching unless there's lots of it's all looking really organized, and it shouldn't look chaotic, because I think that looks unprofessional, and a lot of people would kind of move away from that. On the notion of games, I mean, I think it's a really interesting one as well, and I don't know if it does hark a little bit to the growth of the game, that if a child sees golf on the telly and they're interested in taking up that game, and they go to a set of junior sessions and the activity looks nothing like that, okay, because we're just playing games, but it doesn't really look like it's the game they saw on telly, then there's a kind of mismatch. And I always kind of tell the story of my son when he was 8 years old, and he gave up rugby, and his reasons for giving up rugby was because he just wanted to play rugby. And I thought, oh, how odd. What an odd reason to give up a sport for. And it's because he'd went to six sessions and had never done anything that looked like the Six Nations that he saw on telly, and wanted to have a go at, So he was giving up rugby because he just wanted to play rugby. And and I kind of see this a little bit as well, where we're just designing games for the sake of having fun, like you said, as a quite shallow concept, rather than it being something that's contextually relevant. Now, it can fall into two camps, and I know some people who would argue that it's not about the game, it is just about fun, and they can come along to this session and they might never want to go on the golf course, and that's fine, but that's just a different thing then. That's just a different thing, and it's a different argument. And I think we might actually, in the not too distant future, 5 or 10 or 15 years, have a breed of golfer that never goes on a golf course. They just go to a top golf range, or go on a simulator, and that's a different thing again. But we would say, in terms of the skill acquisition side of things, and the way we learned, and probably yourself as a kid, was we pretty much got brought up on golf courses, and we're playing and learning to play on a golf course, and developed our enthusiasm because we were playing the real thing that we were watching Faldo on the telly, or Seve on, and we felt like we were doing the same thing. So from an intrinsic motivation point of view, for me, games should capture the absolute essence of the game, and that's different to games for the sake of fun.
Yeah. I think there has to be balance, doesn't there? I mean,
there has to be balance,
you've got games, we've got challenges. A game for me will look very much like a game, but there's going to be multiple levels to it. There's going to be progression. There's going to be an opportunity, like I said before, for us to hold these kids' hands through the different levels of this game to get them to where we need them to be, so they can start asking questions about how to be better. And then, when we come up with a related challenge a little time later during that session, then that becomes more or less what we expect them to be able to do on the golf course. So constantly tying it together. And also, let's not forget, as you said, it is so vital that at regular intervals throughout their development, these kids have to be on a golf course, whether they can hit it 30 yards or 130, be out there playing the game of golf, because that's what we're trying to teach them to do.
Yeah, and it's one of the aspects of, and I keep saying it's an aspect of constraints-led coaching, and I think Gavin, you mentioned it earlier as well. This does not exclusively belong to constraints-led coaching. It's just good coaching. It's just what we've been doing for 30 or 40 years, and we've just chucked labels on it, and we're certainly not trying to position ourselves that we kind of own these concepts. So just make that clear. Task simplification. So just making the task simpler. But it can still contain all of the key information sources that the real game has. So we can just make the ball bigger, or the club head bigger, or the target closer, but we can still be trying to get the ball in the hole. We can still put in a set of cones that are a water hazard, that brings in strategy, that brings in, and kids love all these things. But we can just shrink the physical demand down, and make the task of hitting the golf ball bigger or easier, keep all the key aspects of the game present, you know, and they can experience a bit of success and have a bit of fun and understand about strategy and scoring and tactics and challenge and all of these kind of things.
Yeah, there's no doubt that you definitely wrote the book that I wish I'd have written myself, because having read a lot of what you've put down, it just makes so much sense. And I would urge people to go out there and research more about what you've come up with, because it adds such an important dimension to people's coaching, and it adds substance. And I think that's a great word to use here, because it does what our sessions are supposed to say on the tin ultimately. And a child is going to be far more engaged in our sport if that child feels like he or she is learning. You know, if they're just playing games from one week to the next, like your son at 8 years old, I just want to play rugby, no question. Well, why can't we just play rugby? Why can't we just go play golf? You know, I don't believe that there is a certain level that a child needs to be at in order to go and play on the golf course. That is totally irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. We put them off age appropriate, distance appropriate tees and just get them to play. There you go. It's 150 yards to the hole. There's a bag of sticks. There's a couple of balls. Off you go. Crack on. And, you know, it's just creating these wonderful experiences that will last a lifetime for them, but they'll remember these. But also from our perspective, it puts these kids in the right space where we can answer their questions. Because you know what, if you do get a child for the first time, not to stand on the driving range in lesson 1, but to go out onto the first hole and play that hole from 150 yards, they're going to have so many experiences in that 30-minute session. And they're going to be so full of questions. They want to know how to do this, how to do that. It's going to put you, the coach, in such a great spot, because you're going to know how to teach based on what they've asked. You're going to know the answers to all the questions. And that's where I think we get lost a little bit. There's been a huge growth, I think, in this games-led approach to coaching. And I see so much online and social media now where some of these games take an hour to set up, and it just seems a little bit pointless. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot to it. But the purpose and substance is so important. So I'm going to shut up now, Stu. Over to you, pal. Otherwise, I'll be on this soapbox forever.
No, all great points, and I think, you know, what you've said there, Gavin, and Graeme, you said something a little bit earlier there about, you know, somebody watching the game, being inspired by seeing it either on the TV, on YouTube, or maybe if it's they go with their dad, you know, and they just wander around the golf course and watch them play. It made me think of how I got into golf. My dad used to go and play at a local pay and play. I would kind of tag along with him. We'd get away from the clubhouse 3-4 holes out, and he'd let me chuck me a couple of balls and give me a little club, and I could go in the rough and I could chop balls down the rough while he played. So, and then I would go on the green and hole a couple of putts. So I actually experienced what I was seeing. So I experienced the game, and I think that's a huge point, isn't it? You know, let young players or let beginners experience the game, but find out why they've got into it, find out why they've come to the session, why they've come for a lesson. You know, oh, I saw golf on TV. Well, as soon as you know that, you're like, right, okay, well, let's go and recreate the game. So I think, Graeme, that's a huge point. And before, and I know Anthony's got a question, one final kind of question for me was a little bit selfish for all of our coaches around the world. If you had to give 2 or 3 pieces of advice for great coaching, Graeme, to any instructor, whatever level they are, what would your top tips be?
Sure. I'll just check that agenda you sent me. I don't see that on the agenda. It's a difficult, you know, it's really,
Graeme, it's all about adaptability and coping with the demands.
Adaptability. No, it really is. I mean, I think, but the biggest thing that I've kind of journey I've been on, and, you know, kind of got into constraints-led coaching, and then became too entrenched and set in that idea myself, almost evangelical about it. It's all got to be hands off, and it's all got to be constraints-led. But I think the first thing, and again, it's just good coaching, isn't it? That it's trying to find out what the golfer wants out of it, and it seems bloody obvious, but you know, somebody might just come along for a golf lesson because it's a release for them for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to see their numbers on TrackMan, and that's what's enjoyable to them. And it's not even necessarily about going and playing better in the medal on Saturday, you know, and that's something that I kind of had to reflect on myself when I kind of was jumping all into one sort of methodology, if you like. So it was that kind of understanding what is somebody trying to get out of it, and just trying to, you know, give them that. It's not all about manipulating constraints to induce self-organization and all of these fancy concepts. It's just really about, you know, what is it you're trying to get out of this. I think that typically from my own perspective, if I'm given a kind of, if we are trying to change something technically, the first thing I would try and do is to see if I can do that without any prescription of that technical change, and therefore, you know, can we explore external concepts to see if it can bring about a change in a way, you know. So I would always suggest that coaches should look into some of the literature on attentional focus. I'm sure you guys probably do that, and external versus internal, and the pros and cons of those approaches. You know, and particularly in relation to becoming too internally focused, and how that, you know, can bring about psychological problems. And I can certainly relate that to my own game. One thing I didn't mention earlier on when I was trying to play, that one of the reasons I stopped playing is because I pretty much got the yips when I was pitching. And it became this journey into technical development to try and stop doing this, and it just got worse and worse and worse. Anyway, so yeah, I would say just kind of explore the what's out there in terms of the attentional focus stuff, internal versus external focus. External focus, again, I'm preaching to the converted probably. You guys probably know all about this stuff, but it's more about information about the effect of your movement rather than information about the movement itself. So for example, yeah, I think TrackMan and launch monitors are a great thing because it gives you information about your the effect of your swing. It doesn't give you information about your swing. It doesn't tell you where the club is at the top of your backswing, but it's telling you what your swing produces. So for example, if you know, if TrackMan's telling you that your swing's producing a 4-degree out to in swing path with a 3-degree open club face, then can you challenge the player to change those numbers? Because that's what your movement's producing. So can you move in such a way that produces different numbers? Well, if you can, you're applying a more external focus there. Okay, because I'm not telling you internally how to change that. So that would be my only two things that spring to mind, Stuart, as I'm adapting to that question you just asked me there.
Sorry, the curveball there, Graeme. But no, and I think you know, Gavin and I talk a lot when we go through certification of our instructors. Is, you know, is really to, you know, you've got to know the human being in front of you. You've got to be able to figure out, you know, why they're in the game, what they're really looking for, what motivates them, and then, like you say, is explore ways that are a little bit more, I guess, not easier, but more natural, of saying like, well, okay, the TrackMan's telling us we do this, that, you know, the ball's going to do that when you see these numbers. You don't like that. That causes you issues on the golf course and your scoring. So what can we do to try and change that number? Okay, you have a go and show me, if you tried to change the number, what would you do? And then, you know, somebody with a little bit of ability and experience generally will kind of figure a few things out. And again, like you say, that they develop ownership of those movements, rather than, like you were saying before, is with some of the sessions you saw, like for your son and your kids in sport, is just the solutions being provided. Like that gets a result when you're there, but when the player goes away, they don't own what they've done, because they've not dug it out, they've not felt it, it's not internalized. So I think that's a great answer, and it's something that we embrace with all of our coaches. So Anthony, I know you've got a question for Graeme. You've been sat waiting patiently, so if you want to unmute yourself, please fire away.
Oh, hey lads, hey Graeme, nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
basically, I was golfing with a guy yesterday, a young guy, he's 26 handicap, had a dirty big slice. And I changed his grip pressure slightly, hit a lovely shot down the fairway about 30 yards behind mine. And next thing, he goes back to his old way. And then sort of 5, 6, 7 holes later, I do it again, hits a lovely drive down the fairway, and then goes back to his old way again, you know? So like, you know, how do you get somebody that you've already, you know, helped, they seen the difference straight away, and yet they keep reverting back to their old way, which doesn't work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And your diagnosis of the issue, what did you say? It was grip pressure, did you, or grip position? Yes. Or
just grip pressure?
Pressure and maybe not releasing the club head, or was it just kind of holding on to it? Or
yeah, he had a dirty big slice at the start, and then I just got him to sort of start waving the club head and releasing the pressure in the hands a lot, and he hit fantastic drives after that, you know, for 2 holes, and then all of a sudden back to his dirty big slice again, you know.
Yeah. So ultimately, you are trying to bring about some, yeah, exactly. I mean, if I had to answer to this question, make a fortune. But from a philosophical point of view, if you like, obviously something has to change. So again, using information to bring about that change. One thing you're giving the players information about their grip pressure, and they're struggling to do that. And I guess, is it just the kind of the actual tension of the situation makes them kind of tighten everything up again, or could you kind of get to the understanding about why they weren't able to retain that change?
I think he was trying to retain it, but the problem was, I think he was trying too hard.
Yeah, absolutely. So all I would say on that is that in terms of you know, a constraints-led approach, and if you were trying to change a swing path, or you were trying to change a club face angle, then again, I think for me, I would go right to the very low representative end of the spectrum. You know, potentially take them out of the context of the real game at that point, because you're saying they're playing off 26, they're on the golf course, maybe the challenge is just too big. And if your entry point into the game is at a point where the challenge is too big, then you're more likely probably to manifest all sorts of problems, technical problems. And could you start to shrink? It's longer term, I guess, but could you start to make the challenge smaller, okay, so that the player has the space, if you like, to start to develop some functional movement? You know, and I always think that because golf courses are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, that the entry point for a lot of golfers is too hard. And therefore, in the effort to try and propel that ball far enough to make the golf course playable, all sorts of problems develop before they've actually learned how to move. You know, so my instinct there would be to try and shrink the challenge and then just gradually grow the challenge.
Yeah, what I did was I said, right, I'm going to give you an extra shot on every hole. I said, I'll take 2 shots, tee to green, and whoever gets the closest to the flag when we get there is the winner. So I gave him his extra shot down the hole, divide his distance after his drive by 2, that type of thing. And all of a sudden he started getting it going very well, you know?
Yeah.
When he wasn't trying to keep up with me with a big drive, you know?
Yeah, so there you are. So you've kind of, if you like, you've taken that requirement, you've made the challenge a little bit easier. And that's the only thing that I would kind of think about there, is that kind of challenge point. You know, and how that's affecting the player. If we go into too difficult too early, 26 handicapper, we're going to get a fair bit of dysfunctionality, I think, just coming out of that. The challenge point is far too far ahead for them.
Yeah, like as I said to him, it took you 11 months to learn to walk. I said, you didn't spend 11 months learning to play golf. There's your problem.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Yeah,
you know, he had a half an hour lesson or something, 2 half-hour lessons, and that was it, like, in his lifetime. But they weren't with me now, seriously. But you know,
But it's hard, isn't it, to fit that into, I think the hard thing in all of this is trying to make it work commercially.
Yes.
You know, because we don't always have the luxury of time with players, and we want this kind of more immediate outcome and whatnot. So no, it's a real challenge, that one.
Yeah, I think the new kind of system moving forward, like some of the guys are talking about, is having clients sign up for 3 months, 6 months, that type of thing, or basically just take them on a monthly basis to work with them. Seems to be the best way forward for coaching golf.
Seems to be, doesn't it? It seems to be that kind of idea, and I think particularly that level of player, it just gives you that bit more time just to relax and say, right, okay, let's just build this up here gradually.
Like if he's only a young fella like Gavin there, you know. He was at it for 2 years or so, but like that, they don't seem to want to put the work in or put the effort in. They just want, as you say, instant results from the TrackMan, you know.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I think there is players that need instant results, and you know, if you're working with a performance golfer and it's Friday and they need to perform on the Saturday, you know, sometimes we just need to put band-aids on players, don't we, and give them something that they can take to the course. I mean, I think there's just different approaches. Certainly, if I was kind of, you know, talking about that, Anthony, that longer term approach, I've been questioning that quite a lot in various conversations recently, that, you know, sometimes maybe the best thing for a high performance golfer is just give them something they can go and play with tomorrow, and if it's something else again next week, then so be it, because, you know, if confidence erodes at that level, then it doesn't matter how long-term approach you take it. You know, once that's gone, it can be really hard to get back. So sometimes we just need to fix people up and send them out there, I think.
Yeah, I remember years ago, McGregor Golf, when Darren Clark started on tour, that he wasn't doing very well, and he offered to buy him a Ferrari if he won. And the following week he went out and won and got the Ferrari. The second week they done it again, and they said, we'll buy you an F40 Ferrari. Bang, he won again. So he won 3 weeks in a row and got 3 Ferraris off them. I don't know how McGregor's are doing now if they're still in business, but he had an incentive, as you say, you know.
Yeah, that wouldn't work for me though.
Yeah.
I couldn't win next week if you offered me a Ferrari.
Well, I knew a club pro used to play for a garden shed or a lawnmower, had something in his head going out, you know.
We used to play for our wages. My old boss, Jesus, he used to, we wouldn't take us on the golf course unless we were playing for money. You know, that was my, I think, Oliver introduction into, it was less professional back then, I guess. It's all been sanitized now, hasn't it, at the game? But when I was an assistant pro, the boss would not leave the shop unless it was for money, for sure.
Yeah, incredible.
You know, and they were kind of pretty decent players back then, because most of the club pros were.
It was a tough way. You either did or didn't do it. It made you play.
Yeah, and listen, there's a lot in that, and it reminds me of the story, and I think it's in the book, about Podrick Harrington talking about his short game and how he got so good at it. And that was because they always played for money, and if you couldn't get up and down for money, you had to leave his group because you couldn't afford to be in it. And it was just kind of, had to learn how to get the ball in the hole. And
yeah, I used to play a lot of Podrick when we were younger. That's why I'm broke.
Yeah, and I tell you, there's a load of had to stories in successful people. You know, I had to learn how to do this because I was short off the tee, so I had to become a good long iron player. Or, you know, I was a wee bit shorter, so I had to have a really good short game, and you know, all these problems that they had to solve in order to get. Yeah, and it's just that kind of struggle. Struggle's a good thing when it comes to development. I'm not sure you're struggling when you're getting given Ferraris right enough, but.
No, Anthony, perfect. Thanks, Graeme. Thanks for answering the questions. I think there's a lot of key areas to what you've both discussed there, in terms of, you know, keys to, like you said, the struggle, and to the motivation, like the Ferrari, you know, people. But I think what you were talking about with high performing players that are maybe going out to play, and if that confidence does erode, that self-belief diminishes, then it's very dicey ground, isn't it? And your job as a coach is to help them maintain their confidence or boost their self-esteem and confidence, and not just an ego massage and kind of, a little bit of, BS along the way. It's more about, like, listen, you might not have this yet, but you're definitely on the way to getting it. So some great points. I know we're getting close for time here, Graeme, and we appreciate your time. Anybody that's watching, you can buy Graeme's book, A Constraints-Led Approach to Golf Coaching. Simply Google it, Graeme McDowall, and that title. You'll find it there. It's definitely worth a read, and obviously dives much deeper into all the areas that Graeme's talked about today as well. So from my side,
and of course, Stuart, if anybody wins the tournament next week, Graeme will send them a free book.
I was going to say, Anthony will send them a Ferrari.
But yeah, no, Graeme, we'd like to really thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it. Fascinating topic. I think it's something that's close to Gavin's heart and my heart. And we talk a lot with all of the coaches through our education process. And I know you do, Graeme, obviously with the coaches you work with and the people you lecture to, the students at SRUC there that you help coach and mentor as well, come out of that with a great awareness of how to really train with a purpose, and get the most out of what they can do. So thank you very much for your time, Graeme. We really appreciate it. Anthony, thank you for being with us, asking the question. Gavin, thank you as well. And we'll see you all, guys, everybody next week.
Thanks, lads.
Thanks, guys. Thanks very much.